Hi everyone, in today's lesson we are going to continue our discussion on the Roman Empire, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what it means to say it was the actual Roman Empire. We're going to talk about how the Roman Republic actually collapsed, which led to the actual empire, how we go from a rule of the people to a single ruler. We'll talk about Julius Caesar and his reign and his epic downfall, and then turn into our rule of Augustus and how he sets up Rome for the future. So make sure you're in your interactive notebook and you're following along. All right, we're on page 8 of your interactive notebook. And again, we're talking about the Roman Republic. Let's start off today with our essential question. How did the creation of the Roman Empire transform Roman government, society, their economy, and their culture? So let's talk about how we go from a republic, which we talked about in the previous video, to this empire. Remember, our republic meant that we were ruled by the people, or a democracy, and an empire is going to be ruled by one person or a single emperor. So if we back up and we talk about, or we continue, I should say, we're not backing up. We want to talk about where we left off in the previous episode. Remember, Rome had conquered and taken over the Etruscans, and that victory brought conflict between the rich and the poor. We had a lot of wealthy landowners who kind of kick people off of their land. They kind of outrun those who were working, have some maybe like less wealthy people who owned land, and they just kind of can't compete with these very wealthy people. They sell off their land, they're basically jobless and homeless, and so there's this huge gap between the rich and the poor. The other big problem with that is a lot of those landowners that kind of become homeless, they were former soldiers who were very loyal to the Republic, very loyal to the military, and so that kind of leaves a bitter taste in their mouth, and it's not creating this great society to live in. So people are very upset with this very large gap. Enter two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, who are pictured here. They were two people who were elected as tribunes, and you'll remember the tribunes were people who were elected that looked out for the common people. They make laws that kind of help them. So they come into the picture. They tried to pass laws that are going to help the poor. Unfortunately, people in the Senate did not agree with them. They don't jive. And both of them are ultimately murdered. Separate years at separate times, but both of them meet very violent deaths because they shared other ideas. So that launches Rome into a huge civil war. As a reminder, a civil war is when a country fights itself. And it ultimately leads to like different generals throughout the Roman army kind of vying for political power. The military, unfortunately, we talked in the previous lesson that the military had been very strong and well feared and disciplined and regimental. It basically falls apart. They become very undisciplined, disloyal to the Roman Republic. We actually have soldiers that are being kind of just trained, just recruited from the poor, just kind of like, hey, you want to join the army? Like, it's just not, it's kind of chaos. And people become, or these soldiers, they're not necessarily loyal to the Republic. They're loyal to individual generals. So that's causing kind of chaos and just not, it feeds into that civil war. So ultimately this brings, we need some sort of something has to happen to end this chaos. Enter Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar comes in and tries to take control. In 60 BCE, he joins with the two gentlemen pictured here. Their kind of stone heads are pictured here. A wealthy Roman known as Crassus and a successful general known as Pompey. The three of them get together and they basically take control of Rome, and they form what becomes known as the first triumvirate. Tri meaning three. So there are three guys in power. They rule for the next 10 years pretty successfully. But unfortunately, after those 10 years, we start to see some jealousy and some distrust happening. Caesar gains a lot of fame for conquering throughout different places that feed into this Roman Empire. And like I said, people start to get jealous. One of the biggest one is Pompey. He fears that Caesar's growing power is not going to be good. He ultimately challenges him. And Caesar's like, okay, bring it. And Caesar ultimately defeats Pompey. He defeats him in Greece, Asia, Spain, and Egypt. This guy, Caesar, was on point at the time. He is The people liked him so much at the time, the Senate declares him dictator for life in 44 BCE. So, he returns home after defeating Pompey, and people are like, woohoo, we love him. But that ultimately kind of turns on him, which we'll talk about in a second. But once he is named dictator for life, he goes through, he does govern as an absolute ruler, meaning he has 100% total control or absolute control. Although he is an absolute ruler or a dictator, whatever you want to call him, he does make some reforms. He wasn't too, he looks out for people. He's not like crazy, like crazy dictator that's all about me. He does look out for the people. He actually granted wider citizenship. He expanded the Senate. He did throw some of his friends in there, but still he expands the Senate. And he also creates jobs for the poor. However, even though in 44 BCE he's named dictator for life, there was growing distrust. A lot of the higher ups, the nobles, members of the Senate, they feared that he was getting too much power, he was too successful, and he was too popular. So, a group of senators that opposed him murdered him on the Senate floor. They literally stabbed him to death, I think 23 times. March 15th, 44 BCE. March 15th becomes known as the Ides of March. That's when he's assassinated. So Caesar, he's done. This launches Rome into yet another civil war. So we got to find, again, a way to rein it in and enter now. We have 43 BCE. Some of his supporters take control. 3 people, again, take control. So we have Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. Octavian was actually Caesar's great nephew, I think. I'm pretty sure it was great nephew. So he's kind of like in the family line. And then the 2 others lumped in. They become known as the Second Triumvirate. Again, 3 guys get together. They rule for 10 years. Similar to the first triumvirate, then we have some problems. We have some jealousy and some violence that ultimately ends it. Lepidus is basically just forced to retire. They're just like, okay, go out to pasture, please. Mark Antony, he goes off to Egypt. He meets and falls in love with Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. And Octavian actually kind of like accuses him. He says like, look, I see that you're trying to like get over there with Egypt. You want to like build your own little empire. You're trying to rule Rome from Egypt. I'm not cool with that. So they go into a huge battle with them. Ultimately, in 31 BCE, Octavian defeats both the forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra combined, and they actually commit suicide. So like, what a way to end. Like, not on a high note, but so Octavian is in charge now all by himself. He accepts, I think more like gives himself the title of Augustus. So he becomes known as Caesar Augustus and Imperator. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's weird, and I'll explain why it's weird. And he basically rules Rome by himself. Augustus actually means exalted one, and Imperator means supreme military commander. And that's actually where we get the word emperor. Imperator, emperor, it goes on. So he's the sole emperor of Rome at this point. So we actually enter, or I keep saying we in these videos, like I'm not there. I know you guys aren't there, but anyway, you get me. At this time period under Augustus, Rome actually moves, as I said, from a republic where it's governed by the people into an empire where we have a single person in the rule. So power no longer resides with the citizens, but in the hands of a single ruler. And at this time, it was Caesar Augustus. You might be thinking, oh my God, it's going to be awful. They actually enter into what becomes known as the Pax Romana, about 200 years of peace and prosperity. So it wasn't terrible. They had some good emperors, they had some bad emperors, but for the most part, those 200 years are not too shabby. It's kind of like, as we talked about with Greece, their golden age, this is kind of Rome's golden age. Augustus creates a lasting government that succeeds well after his death. He dies in 14 BCE, but what he sets up kind of carries through for later generations. He glorifies Rome. He creates massive buildings. He basically beautifies the place. Again, very similar to what we talked about with Greece's golden age and Pericles. He sets up a civil service that's basically going to administer or run the empire for him. And then we also see agriculture and trade becoming two of the biggest industries to foster the Roman Empire. Agriculture is the most important, and then trade is, there's a vast trading network. Sorry, I missed the K there. Vast trading network. The Roman world, what's it look like? There was massive slavery during this time period. Slavery and captivity was very common. It's basically a significant part of both Roman life in the cities and in farm life. Slavery actually leads to gladiators. A lot of the slaves, they were forced to fight. Some of them, you could kind of fight your way to freedom if you survived. Hence the video Gladiator that you should be watching. But slavery was very common in ancient Rome. We also have gods and goddesses in ancient Rome. The Romans are kind of like beg, borrow, and steal. We're going to see a lot of similarities between the Roman gods and goddesses as we see with the Greek gods and goddesses. Basically, they have all the same powers and stories and myths and things like that. They just change the names. So they honor these guardian spirits and gods. Jupiter would be the same as Zeus. So like I said, if you look up Greek gods, you can say like, hey, what's their Roman counterpart, and it'll give it to you. But they have pretty much all the same ones. Like we talked about with Romulus and Remus, and they were the sons of the god Mars and the Latin princess. Mars was the god of war, who his counterpart in the Greek world would have been Ares. So very interesting that we've got so much like I said, beg, borrow, and steal. Ultimately, though, the worship or the emperor becomes the religion. Worshiping the emperor becomes the official religion of Rome, and it's later going to transfer into Christianity and Catholicism. Lastly, society and culture. The rich lived very lavish lives, as you saw in the readings that you did. Just the life of luxury and the baths and the dinner parties and things like that. But the majority of people are poor, and they receive some grain, we'll say, some handouts from the government. In order to keep the citizens kind of tamed or, not to get out of hand, because there are so many of them, they did something that was kind of smart. They create multiple holidays, so like times for celebration where they can all get together and celebrate. And they also host free public events in the Colosseum. So like those gladiator events, they would have been free. People can go. It's like a sporting event, as barbaric as it sounds to us, going to watch people literally fight to their death. It was like their Super Bowl. Like, let's go, let's watch, let's spectate, and like just get on into it. Like people's hands, like amazing. I can't imagine watching that, but that was life then. But they created these events, and the Colosseum, when I say to control the masses, it was a way to kind of be like, hey, like don't kind of like take us over and like cause chaos in the streets because we're giving you these free things that are fun to go to. And so it was a way in which they can control the public to keep control civil unrest, basically. So this is what the Roman Republic looks like, the Roman Empire, what the Roman Empire looks like. And it's going to lead us into our next video where we talk about how Rome starts to come to an end. That Pax Romana is going to come to an end, and we are going to see Rome kind of come crumbling down. So make sure you tune in for that one. Thanks for watching, and make sure this is in your interactive notebook. See you next time.